Bible prophecy is active and unfolding daily. Zechariah 12, Isaiah 17, Psalm 83, Ezekiel 38. Here is what the LameStream Media is not telling you. Shalom, my friends. Welcome to this week's newscast. From the New York Times, the U.S. and Russia announced an agreement last week for a partial truce in Syria, effective last Saturday, but the truce does not apply to two of the most lethal extremist groups, ISIS and the Nusra Front. It depends entirely on the good faith of Russia, Iran, and the Assad regime. Good luck on that one. None of them have ever shown good faith in the past. I said it before, my friends, and I'll say it again. There will be no ceasefire. In fact, this just came in from the Washington Post. The so-called truce in Syria that started at midnight last Friday began to fray on Sunday, with Russian warplanes resuming airstrikes on towns in the north and fresh reports of artillery fire across several front lines. From the Hill, General John P. Abizaid, retired commander of U.S. Central Command, said in an interview in West Point's Combating Terrorism Center's magazine, quote, "The scope of the ideological movement, the geographic dispersion of Islamic extremism, the number of terror attacks, the number of people swearing allegiance, and the ground they hold have all increased. Groups like ISIS have now taken on state-like forms and features that are unlike anything we've seen in the past. So, on balance, we are in a worse position strategically with regard to the growth of international terrorism, Islamic terrorism in particular, than we were after September 2001. Close quote. And from the Associated Press, Israel's defense minister, Moshe Ya'alon, said last Wednesday, quote, "The Iranian regime, through the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, is building a complex terror infrastructure, including sleeping cells that are stockpiling arms, intelligence, and operatives, and are ready to act on order in Europe and America. Iran is training, funding, and arming emissaries to spread a revolution." Close quote. Iran is funding, arming, training. Let's not forget, they just acquired $100 billion. Now, if you missed last Thursday's word study, I explained what the word abomination means. In Lucas, that's Luke, chapter 16, verse 15, we see, "That which is highly esteemed among men is an abomination in the sight of Elohim." What is an abomination? I've always said an abomination is something that turns Elohim's stomach. Things he sees happening throughout history that utterly disgust and disappoint him, even though he knows beforehand every one of them in familiar ways. But there is an epic and global prophetic event coming very soon in our history that Yeshua spoke of in Matthew, that's Matthew, chapter 24, verse 15, as well as in the book of Mark, chapter 13, verse 14, and that is the abomination that causes desolation. This is an act committed by the Antichrist, which is not very far off in our timeline, my friends. If you haven't seen last week's word study, you'll see this graphic at the end of today's video, as well as a text link in the more info section beneath this video. And if you want to understand the abomination that causes desolation, what Yeshua was referring to in the books of Matthew and Mark, he was quoting from Daniel. And if you haven't yet studied the book of Revelation, you can study the book with me, chapter by chapter, verse by verse. And I encourage you to do so because it is the only book in the entire Bible that promises a special beracha, a special blessing to everyone who reads it and or hears it read. There'll be a text link beneath today's video in the more info section that you can click on, and it'll take you over to my full playlist study on the book of Revelation. Click on that, save that page as a favorite, and take the time in studying that book and seeing what it says. I preface it with some things from the book of Daniel and explaining, some things that lead up to all the events in Revelation. Again, if you haven't studied that book, it's powerful, and it's a book that all the churches everywhere on the planet avoid and have always avoided. By the way, if you watch Pastor J.D. Farag's Mideast Prophecy updates every Sunday, as I often do, he made a comment just this past Sunday with a bit of reluctance, saying that he thinks it's very possible that there may not be a presidential election in America this coming November. I have to tell you, I am in absolute agreement with J.D. I've said the same thing Pastor J.D. is saying ever since Obama took office and started his very successful campaign of taking America down. And that is that I would not be surprised at all if there was something like a large financial crash that started the ball rolling toward a one world government before the November election in America of this year. Such an event only takes a moment to happen, my friends. And we have a multitude of historic moments to look forward to over these next 8 months. Turning to wars and rumors of wars, from Ynet News, Hezbollah now has the ability to launch 100,000 rockets at Israel at the rate of 1,200 rockets per day from batteries hidden in dozens of villages in South Lebanon. Hezbollah also has plans to take over Israeli towns near the border fence. A senior Israel Air Force officer said, quote, "In such a conflict where the home front will be attacked, all restrictions will be lifted. We will not call houses before we attack." Close quote. Additionally, the IDF is building a new defensive line. No one who drives along the northern border can ignore this new line of cliffs, which are carved out of the hills next to the border communities. The barriers are 10 meters high, that's almost 33 feet high, and are aimed at preventing infiltrations of Hezbollah special forces into Israeli towns. On Monday, February 22nd, from the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, Kurdish-Arab alliance of the Syrian Democratic Forces seized control of a key gas facility and main financial resource for ISIS in Syria's northeastern Hasaka. Further, ISIS attacked the Syrian government's main supply route from Damascus to the northern Syrian city of Aleppo, a day after the group targeted Damascus and Homs in some of the bloodiest car bomb attacks of the war. Fighting and airstrikes are continuing unabated across the country just one day after U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov had reached a provisional agreement on terms of a cessation of hostilities that would not include ISIS. Then on Wednesday, February 24th, from ARA News, Kurdistan, a huge explosion hit a security building in central Jable city in Latakia province, where senior Russian forces were holding a meeting with Syrian army commanders. The explosion was caused by a car bomb that hit the main entrance of the building. The initial death toll has reached 10, mostly Russian soldiers. Then on Thursday, February 25th, from the Times of Israel, a steady stream of Hamas and Salafi jihadist terror groups are joining ISIS fighters locked in combat with Egyptian forces in Sinai. The fighters are crossing into Egypt with the knowledge of Hamas, which supervises the few remaining tunnels that have not been closed by Egypt. From Asharq al-Awsat, UK, the Saudi Ministry of Foreign Affairs said Iran recently sent thousands of Shiite Afghani refugees to fight alongside the IRGC and Hezbollah in Syria. Meanwhile, more lies from Secretary of State John Kerry, who is telling everyone that Iran has reduced its involvement in Syria and withdrawn a significant number of its elite Revolutionary Guard troops. Politics. On Friday, February 26th, from the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, massive air raids continued in northern Aleppo as Russian jets completed at least 7 raids. And other bombardments were reported in the western zone by Syrian government jets. Then on Sunday, February 28th, from CNBC, a twin suicide bombing claimed by ISIS killed 70 people in a Shiite district of Baghdad in the deadliest attack inside the capital this year as militants launched an assault on its western outskirts. Police sources said the suicide bombers were riding motorcycles and blew themselves up in a crowded mobile phone market in Sadr City, wounding more than 100 people in addition to the dead. Turning to our Intifada update, on Wednesday, February 24th, from the Times of Israel, Israel police caught 2 East Jerusalem men with pipe bombs and ammunition hidden in their kiosk outside of Herod's Gate in the Old City of Jerusalem. From Ynet News, 30-year-old Captain Eliav Gelman, an IDF reservist, was killed by gunfire targeting a terrorist who attempted to stab him at the Gush Etzion junction south of Jerusalem. The terrorist was wounded. On Friday, February 26th, from Ynet News, an unarmed 48-year-old Israeli security guard, Tzvika Cohen was critically wounded in an axe attack at the Ma'ale Adumim Mall on Thursday night. The terrorist escaped, and his bloody axe used in the attack was confiscated. Then on Sunday, February 28th, from Israel Hayom and Ynet News, Friday's axe-wielding terrorist was arrested by Israeli authorities. A gruesome security video shows the terrorist repeatedly striking Tzvika Cohen with the axe. Cohen's brother, Moshe, said the terrorist had worked at the same shopping center and that he and Cohen knew each other. And get this, one of the terrorist's relatives called the police and turned him in. Turning to our review of last week's news, the geographic dispersion of Islamic extremism, the number of terror attacks, the number of people swearing allegiance, and the ground they hold are all increasing. The Iranian regime, through the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, is building a complex terror infrastructure and are ready to act on order in Europe and America. Syrian democratic forces seize control of a key gas facility and main financial resource for ISIS in Syria's northeastern Hasaka. ISIS attacked the Syrian government's main supply route from Damascus to the northern Syrian city of Aleppo. The so-called truce in Syria has already been broken. Hezbollah now has the ability to launch 100,000 rockets at Israel at the rate of 1,200 per day, and the IDF is building a new defensive line nearly 33 feet high aimed at preventing infiltrations of Hezbollah special forces. A huge explosion hit a security building in central Jableh city in Latakia province. A steady stream of Hamas and Salafi jihadist terror groups are joining ISIS fighters locked in combat with Egyptian forces in Sinai. Iran is sending thousands of Shiite Afghani refugees to fight alongside the IRGC and Hezbollah in Syria. Massive air raids continued in northern Aleppo, with Russian jets completing at least 7 raids, along with other bombardments in the western zone by Syrian government jets. A twin suicide bombing claimed by ISIS killed 70 people in a Shiite district of Baghdad. Israel police caught 2 East Jerusalem men with pipe bombs and ammunition outside of Herod's Gate in the old city of Jerusalem. A 30-year-old IDF reservist was killed by gunfire targeting a terrorist who attempted to stab him at the Gush Etzion junction. And an armed Israeli security guard was critically wounded in an axe attack. The axe-wielding terrorist was arrested 2 days later. And that, my friends, is what the LameStream Media is not telling you. Abba willing, I'll see you here again next week. Until then, stay safe. Shalom.
Crowded rooms, I need more space than I consume. Enough is time alone with you, underneath a naked moon, sharing confidential moods and making chatter. Mockingbird nocturnal sings notations of eternal things, entering the quantum breeze, flying not for want of wings. He lights his gaze on you and me, simply because we matter.